손을 뻗어 이 사랑이 와닿게 닿는 그 순간 Oh beyond of my
Hello and welcome to our morning edition of Arirang News. We begin with these stories making the headlines at this hour. President Lee Jae-myung unveiled the government's three mega projects, describing semiconductors, physical AI, and AI data centers as the three pillars of Korea's next growth engine. Samsung Electronics and SK hynix also announced massive investment plans, including the construction of new semiconductor clusters outside the capital region. The death toll from last week's earthquakes in Venezuela has now risen to more than 1,700. With tens of thousands of people still missing, rescue teams continue to search for survivors, despite the passing of the critical 72-hour survival window. The United States and Iran have given conflicting messages over planned negotiations. President Donald Trump said a meeting will be held in Qatar's capital on Tuesday, and that Tehran had requested talks, but Iran insisted that no meeting had been scheduled. We begin this morning with the leaders of the nation's chip giants Samsung and SK unveiling massive investment plans centered on chips and AI across the regions. President Lee Jae-myung hailed the business moguls as national heroes. Our Yoon Jung-min starts us off.
Driving a leap forward towards a global industrial powerhouse amid fierce global competition. That was a key pledge by President Lee Jae-myung in a national briefing on Monday for the unveiling of what the government labeled as three mega projects.
오직 속도전만이 살 길입니다. 어떤 나라보다 빠른 속도로 인공지능의 핵심 요소를 확보해야 합니다. 반도체, 피지컬 AI, 인공지능 데이터 센터가 대도약을 위한 삼각축입니다.
Another focus was taking a global chip rally, which is driven by AI, as an opportunity to create a growth engine nationwide outside the capital, Seoul. Samsung Group made an investment pledge of a total of over 2.6 quadrillion won, worth over 1.7 trillion US dollars. The chip giant plans region-specific investments, such as advanced packaging in the central region, humanoid robots and batteries in the southeast, as well as chips in Gwangju and the southwest.
We consider Gwangju as a candidate site as we expect a lot of incentives there, including electricity and water supplies, workforce, and various infrastructure.
SK Group announced an investment worth 1 quadrillion won in a project to build AI data centers and 1.1 quadrillion won in AI memory production, respectively.
We plan to build AI data centers with a combined power capacity of 15 gigawatts in each region. We also plan to build a new chip cluster by investing 400 trillion won in the Southwest.
Che added that SK will move up the date to build a chip production line in the city of Yongin. The president hailed the two men as national heroes and promised full support for corporate investments.
또 어려운 결단을 해주신 점에 대해서 우리 국민들을 대표해서 제가 인사 한번 드리도록 하겠습니다.
In line with the blueprints, the authorities also announced their support measures for a chip cluster roadmap centered on the country's southwest and central region, swift transition to AI robots in manufacturing, and large-scale investments for AI data centers. Yoon Jung-min, Arirang News.
Over in Venezuela, the death toll from last week's twin earthquakes has risen, with thousands more injured and many still missing. Rescue teams are continuing to search through the rubble even after the crucial 72-hour window for finding survivors has passed. Our Chung Hye-rim reports.
The death toll from last week's twin earthquakes in Venezuela has risen again as the search for survivors continues. National Assembly President Jorge Rodriguez said on Monday that at least 1,700 people had been killed and more than 5,000 injured. The magnitude 7.5 and 7.2 quakes struck last Wednesday night, hitting La Guaira state and the capital Caracas particularly hard. More than 500 aftershocks have been recorded since then, including a magnitude 4.9 tremor early Monday, according to the UN. Despite passing the critical 72-hour golden window where the probability of survival is highest, crews have pulled off several miraculous rescues. On Sunday, an international coalition rescued 7 people alive from the rubble, including a 21-year-old man and a woman with her baby. According to a damage assessment released by NASA, it is estimated that more than 58,000 buildings have been damaged or destroyed. Meanwhile, the U.S. Geological Survey has issued a statistical model indicating there is a 44% probability that the final death toll will equal or exceed 10,000.
I can give you a proxy indicator. We are procuring, and this is something that has been agreed with the authorities here, 10,000 body bags.
The official also stated more than 25,000 emergency workers, police officers, and soldiers have been deployed while international search and rescue teams continue to support operations on the ground. Chung Hye-rim, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, questions are growing over the future of U.S.-Iran diplomacy after President Donald Trump announced new talks, but Tehran insisted no negotiations are currently planned. The conflicting messages come as both sides focus on implementing their recent ceasefire agreement following months of conflict across the Middle East. Our Lee Seung-jae has more.
President Donald Trump said Monday that Iran had requested a meeting with U.S. officials, but Tehran denied that any new negotiations were currently planned following fresh attacks across the Persian Gulf over the weekend. Trump wrote on social media that a meeting between the two sides would take place on Tuesday in Doha, Qatar. White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt later said Special Envoy Steve Witkoff and the president's son-in-law Jared Kushner would travel to Qatar for the talks. Iran, however, pushed back against those claims, insisting that no negotiations with the United States are scheduled at any level in the coming days. Speaking to reporters, Iranian Foreign Ministry spokesman and negotiating team representative Ismail Bakai stated that Tehran's immediate priority is implementing the Memorandum of Understanding aimed at ending the conflict rather than initiating discussions on a broader agreement. He dismissed reports of a possible meeting with senior U.S. officials in Qatar, stressing that any American visit to Doha would not be related to Iran. The United States and Iran reached an interim agreement earlier this month that requires Tehran to dilute its stockpile of enriched uranium while providing sanctions relief backed by Washington. The deal also calls for the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz and gives both sides 60 days to negotiate a broader and more comprehensive agreement. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
It's been more than a year and a half since 2 North Korean soldiers were captured by Ukrainian forces after being deployed to Russia and expressed their intention to defect to South Korea. Ukraine's foreign minister is set to visit Seoul today and meet with his Korean counterpart for talks on this issue. For more on what to expect, we're joined today by Dr. Andrew Millard, head of Department of International Relations at Taiwan National University. Professor Miller, thanks for coming on today.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
So South Korea said last week that it'll accept North Korean prisoners of war if they wish to defect. But logically and politically, how realistic is this plan?
So this is, right now in the short term, logistically, politically, quite a realistic plan. So logistically, as you said, so far, we only have 2 North Korean soldiers who have said that they're willing to defect. So there's not huge numbers. But also we have to remember the North Korean policy is that during their training, they tell their soldiers, you cannot be captured alive. You must commit suicide before capture. So we know that the North Koreans are trying to prevent this as much as possible. And especially North Korea, Kim Jong-un, he's been promoting the North Korean soldiers in North Korea as heroes of the nation as well. So they're very much trying to protect this. So logistically, I don't think there's too many issues. Politically, however, this is where we have a few different questions. So the first question is, why is South Korea choosing to do this? Now, this could be because South Korea, as we know, is not supplying lethal weapons to Ukraine directly. So South Korea is basically trying to ask, how can we support Ukraine as much as possible without having to send weapons to the area? This is one way that they can continue to support with things like other non-lethal materials and so on. But this could also be a strategy from South Korea, maybe to try to weaken the North Korean position in Ukraine. If they can try to create some rumors, spread the news that North Korean soldiers can defect and come to South Korea, this could weaken the position of the North Koreans in Ukraine. However, this could then later become more of a logistical issue if too many North Korean soldiers decide, oh, we're going to just give up, we're going to be captured and then go to South Korea. Now, on the other hand, maybe North Korea could also exploit this, and maybe they could start putting 1 or 2 spies and deliberately getting those spies captured and being sent to South Korea, which could create then some political domestic issues in South Korea. So in the short term, I think there should be no major issues, but we'll see how this pans out.
Right. And do you expect South Korea and Ukraine to make any progress on this issue during today's meeting?
So at the moment, South Korea has said that it's going to accept any North Korean soldiers who say they are willing to come to South Korea. What we need now is more specific details. So once those soldiers have been captured in Ukraine, how long are they going to stay in Ukraine? If they have been wounded, if they're injured, who is going to provide the medical treatment? Will they be treated in Ukraine, or will they be brought back to South Korea for treatment? So really they need to finalize a lot of these sort of more smaller details. But I think a lot of progress will be made because, as I said, this is really a place where South Korea can really support Ukraine going forward.
Right. And beyond prisoners of war, the foreign ministry said they'll talk about bilateral issues. So what else is on the table for today's meeting?
So we have to say, front and foremost, it's going to focus on security issues. So, of course, they will be finalizing these prisoners of war details, but also, just again, how can South Korea continue to support Ukraine in various different ways? So we know because of South Korean law, they're not sending weapons. However, they are sending helmets, body armor, financial aid, humanitarian aid, medicines, and things like that. So they'll be continuing to discuss how can South Korea continue that support, but also other trade issues. So again, how can South Korea continue to support the Ukraine economy just in general during this war? And then I think another major issue will be, once the war has finished, what will South Korea's role be in sort of post-war reconstruction in Ukraine. I think that's quite an important issue where I think, again, South Korea can really play a big role.
Right, we'll have to see how that meeting plays out. And meanwhile, Russian President Vladimir Putin says Russia will press ahead with its frontline campaign regardless of the new proposals from Ukraine. So where is this war heading?
Oh, this is a good question. So actually what we're starting to see over the past few months is maybe some sort of a shift in momentum, arguably towards Ukraine. Because we see in Europe, in the European Union, we've seen some progress made. So for example, in Hungary, Hungary has basically stopped the veto of the funding. So now Ukraine is getting more EU funding, which means they can buy more weapons, but they're also getting licenses so they can produce their own weapons much more quickly. And also, they're also starting to target different facilities and locations, oil refineries and so on, in Russia, in deeper parts of Russia. So actually, we're starting to see a lot more criticism in Russia against Vladimir Putin. Even the elites are starting to question, does he have a strategy? And so really, we're starting to see the tide turn against Russia. We know there's also economic issues, but this could be a little bit dangerous because this may push Vladimir Putin into increasing his offensive attacks against Ukraine. So I don't think it's going to stop anytime soon. Potentially could get more critical.
I see. And what Putin also said is that he expects U.S. negotiators to come to Moscow once the Middle East crisis eases. So do you expect the Trump administration to soon sort of shift its primary foreign policy focus back to Ukraine?
Potentially. However, what we would argue is that if we look at the whole picture, even before the Middle East war started, Donald Trump has been reducing his support for Ukraine. And oppositely, as I just mentioned, the Europeans, they have been taking more of the lead role in the Ukraine-Russia conflict, supporting Ukraine. So on that perspective, we would say probably there's not going to be a huge change. But also, we have to remember the war in Iran, the Middle East, this was a war basically started by the US and Israel. This was a war that could have been avoided. So for the Donald Trump administration, they must finish this conflict first. They must focus on getting the final deal with Iran before they return their focus back to Ukraine.
I see. All right, Professor Miller, thank you so much for coming on today. We appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
U.S. stocks closed higher on Monday as easing tensions between the United States and Iran and a rebound in technology shares lifted investor sentiment. The Dow Jones Industrial Average rose 306 points, or 0.59%, to a record closing high of 52,182. The S&P 500 gained 1.18%, while the Nasdaq jumped more than 2% as AI and semiconductor stocks recovered strongly after recent losses. Markets were encouraged after Washington and Tehran signaled they would avoid further military escalation despite renewed clashes over the weekend and continued talks on implementing their ceasefire agreement. Electric flight has arrived in Korea. The country's first electric aircraft for passenger flights has entered commercial service. Our Kim Jun-ong looks at the future of urban air mobility.
An electric aircraft leaves the ground. That's followed by a fuel-powered aircraft. Revealing just how quiet the electric plane really is. Developed by Korean startup Tough Mobility, this electric aircraft became the first in Asia to earn safety certification. I'm now in the air above Hwasong, Gyeonggi-do province, traveling at a speed of over 200 kilometers per hour. The aircraft lifted off with remarkable ease and the ride feels smooth, fast, and impressively quiet. Much like an electric vehicle on the road, this plane plugs in to power up. A 1-hour charge is enough to keep it flying for up to 80 minutes. It also produces about 1/10 the noise of an aircraft powered by a regular engine. And with electric motors replacing the engine, there are no exhaust emissions.
I used to fly fighter jets in the Air Force, and I can really feel the difference. This one is much quieter and has far less vibration. Flying without carbon emissions also makes me feel like I'm contributing to a more sustainable future.
Lower operating prices are another key advantage. Rising fuel costs during the recent Middle East conflict have made electric aircraft an increasingly attractive alternative. They also contain fewer components than conventional aircraft, making maintenance simpler and less expensive. Sightseeing flights on this aircraft are now underway over the West Sea. With that, Korea is now the world's 12th country to bring electric aircraft into commercial operation. Furthermore, it's believed the sector could create strong synergy with Korea's advanced battery technology and charging infrastructure.
As battery technology advances, flights could last around 4 hours and carry more passengers. That would open up new opportunities for smaller regional airports and improve connectivity to remote islands.
With the government advancing its vision for urban air mobility, electric aircraft could mark the beginning of a shift beyond more than a century of traditional aviation. Kim Junong, Arirang News.
Good morning, I'm Chu Ji-hyun, and this is The World Now. In the U.S., Supreme Court has ruled that President Donald Trump cannot fire Federal Reserve Governor Lisa Cook for now. The decision defends the central bank's independence while leaving the door open for her removal later. Cook currently faces a lawsuit over mortgage fraud allegations, but the Supreme Court on Monday rejected Trump's bid to lift a lower court order that had blocked Cook's dismissal while that mortgage fraud lawsuit proceeds. The court ruled 5-4 against Trump as Chief Justice John Roberts, joined by one conservative, and the court's 3 liberals wrote that both the fact and the appearance of independence are central to the Fed's design, and that any change to that structure must come from Congress, not the courts. Trump had moved to fire Cook over the mortgage fraud allegations, but Cook maintains the real reason Trump wants to fire her was her refusal to support the rate cuts he demanded. In northern Germany, a man in a child custody dispute shot dead 6 staff at a shelter for mothers and children. The victims of Monday's shooting, 4 women and 2 men, all worked at the facility and stayed near Hamburg. The man's 3-month-old daughter and her mother, who were in the office at the time, were unharmed. The 45-year-old man had an appointment at the facility to discuss the custody over his child. Officials said he was known to police over previous threats. Lower Saxony's interior minister said the shooting appears to be for family reasons with no political motives. The suspect fled by car before police stopped the vehicle and arrested him. Russian missiles and drones killed at least 12 civilians and wounded 40 others across Ukraine on Monday, in what President Volodymyr Zelensky condemned as horrific attacks. A missile struck the central city of Dnipro, killing 6 people and wounding 29, while drones hit a passenger minibus in Zaporizhia, killing 3. Airstrikes were reported across other regions and left people without power. Zelensky renewed his plea for Europe to develop anti-ballistic missile defenses. The attacks come as Ukraine's expanding drone strikes have caused fuel shortages inside Russia, a problem that Russia's President Vladimir Putin acknowledged Sunday while ruling out any concessions to end the war. A fossil that sat forgotten in a drawer in England for 40 years has turned out to be the first dinosaur bone ever found in Antarctica. Scientists found the specimen on James Ross Island in 1985, but could not identify it, so it was stored in the collection of the British Antarctic Survey in Cambridge. Paleontologists on Monday confirmed it is a tailbone from a Titanosaurus, a long-necked plant-eating dinosaur. The Antarctic dinosaur is estimated at about 7 meters long, far smaller than the biggest Titanosaurus, which reached 35 meters. The creature would have lived around 82 million years ago.
The summer heat is becoming more intense by the day. For the first time this season, all of Seoul is under a heat wave advisory. And additional areas in central Korea could be added later today. But with the humidity, it could feel much hotter. So if you're spending time outdoors, be sure to stay hydrated and take it easy. Meanwhile, this intense heat will once again trigger passing rain with thunderstorms. From this afternoon, many regions could see 5 to 15 millimeters of rainfall. Some storms could become quite strong, producing rainfall rates of around 20 millimeters per hour. The sunshine could change into stormy weather in a minute, so please keep an umbrella handy. And this afternoon, Seoul and Daejeon will be getting up to sweltering 33 degrees Celsius. Gwangju at 31, Daegu and Chuncheon will make it to 32 degrees Celsius. Then tomorrow brings a big change for southern Korea. Heavy rain and strong winds will spread across Jeju Island and the southern coast, including intense downpours during the morning. In fact, the island will see showers into Sunday.
That's all we have for this morning. Arirang News will be back at noon Korea time. Thanks for watching.
Curious about Korea?
And especially K-food? How familiar are you with Korean food? The Sea on 3